And welcome to the Cedar Falls Committee of the Whole meeting for this December 17, 2018. I'll now call this meeting to order. For many of you folks watching or council in front of me and staff, usually if the committee meeting is starting here, there's usually someone special to recognize, and tonight is no exception to that. This evening, I'd like to have Joni Krejci come up. I know she's behind me. I saw her beforehand. She can run, but she cannot hide. I wanted to, on behalf of council and staff, present Joni a plaque. She has served 9 years on the Art and Cultural Board. As many of us know and staff knows and many in the city know, we have so many wonderful volunteers that assist us from art and culture to P&Z and all the commissions and organizations and boards and things like that. And Joni is again, no exception to how great at that foundational level, great things get done, city gets recognized, and there's a great payoff long-term for everybody involved. And I know she's got a great supporting cast behind me as well in recognition of this award for her serving 9 years. So before I give it to Joni, I will read. It's a plaque that says, "The City of Cedar Falls presents to Joni Krejci a Distinguished Service Award in appreciation for the contribution to the City of Cedar Falls while serving on the Art and Culture Board, awarded on the 17th day of December 2018. Joni, thank you very much for all your service.
You're very
And now I'd like to introduce City Engineer John Ressler for a Green Hill Road traffic study update. Take your time, I got to go up there.
Thank you, Mayor Brown and members of the council. So we have kind of been on a long journey here with the Green Hill Corridor traffic study. Really the reason behind the study, just a reminder for everybody, we have a couple of near-term projects, one at intersection improvements at Green Hill and Main, and also one at Cedar Heights and Green Hill. So we're going to spend a lot of money in the near term. We wanted to take a look at the entire corridor, make sure we're spending the money wisely, making sure that we're not going to spend money and then have to rebuild something. So we wanted to look at the whole corridor and look at several things about the corridor: traffic flow, traffic safety, complete streets, pedestrian and bicycles, several issues. So we went through an RFP process, and Snyder and Associates was selected to help us with the study. Excuse me. The contract was awarded in, excuse me, in May. We had our first public information meeting on June 12th, our second on August 9th, and our third on November 1st. And we are now ready to present our findings in the final report, as well as recommendations. And so here to present that information is Mark Parrington with Snyder and Associates.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, good evening. I want to try to give you a summary overview of everything we've worked through with the citizens out there in the area and with staff as we've walked through this corridor study. Just a quick reminder of what we're dealing with. We've got Green Hill Road from Hudson on the west end over to Cedar Heights on the east end. Really all the intersections through the whole corridor with the exception of Iowa 58, because that was being addressed through some other things with the Iowa DOT. Essentially some of the things John mentioned, but what we're looking at with the corridor and the goals, we're just trying to look at where are things going. It's been around for quite a while. It's getting close to 30 years in age now, and trying to decide what kind of that next step of evolution is for the corridor. Looking at traffic forecasts, always safety is paramount for us. All the different modes, the complete streets, so we're addressing any pedestrian and bicyclist needs, but also trying to give you some long-term recommendations of what the next steps are for the corridor, again, to help you with planning and budgeting. Some of those main things we looked at with it is why are we here? Why are we doing this in the sense of the community growth and the land use changes in the area? Again, a lot of the area to the north been there for quite some time. Area to the south really taking off now in the Pinnacle Prairie area. And how's that impacting the way intersections function, operate for the neighbors out there? And again, coming back to those budgeting and funding as we talk about what types of things are needed in the long term. The public input process, we had a tremendous opportunity out there, I think, with 3 public meetings in which neighbors were invited in. It worked quite well. We were able to provide them with presentations at the meetings to try to give them a summary of information. It was always a lot of information, a lot to ask of everybody about like what we're doing tonight, but give a lot of information to them. And then through that process, we also had open discussion at tables, large aerials, maps, things they could take a look at. And we tried to get a lot of feedback and a lot of comments from them. Again, realizing we weren't trying to, we're not jumping out of the gate with designing anything yet. We're just really talking about what we think is needed at the intersections and how we take steps forward. Some of the key input that we received from the meetings, and again, these aren't, massive numbers you're looking at, but essentially these are some of the key points that people brought up to us as they talked about it. I've listed the intersections there on the one side of the screen for you. South Main Street got a lot of comments because initially, with the invites that were done for the very first meeting, there had been a lot of feedback with folks with Iowa 58 and Viking, some changes, some traffic diversion. So I think that intersection was kind of impacted the most by that right away, and that's why that one kind of came to the top. A lot of people came to a meeting and initially provided a lot of information. But you can see some of the other intersections that were on people's mind, what type of things. And then when you look on the other side, kind of the interesting comments and things that they had about, well, was it about roundabouts positive or negative? Were there things related to safety? Was it pedestrians? Again, you see everything there and just kind of the comments. We just tried to total those for you so I had a rough idea of the type of things that were on people's minds. The study work, like any major corridor study we do, we put together a lot of information. We're looking at traffic from a historical perspective. We're looking at it as we go into the future. Again, that all relates to the land use out there, what's still yet to come. And of course, crashes. We tried to look at all of that, understand, are people getting hurt out here? Do we have things that are just more minor type severity where maybe it's just plastic on the roadway? But again, what's going on in the corridor? And of course, we always look at how things are actually operating at the time, speeds, what it takes to travel through the corridor, these type of things. The crash history that we've got here, it's really just these key numbers you see that I've highlighted there. The numbers in the vertical rectangle, all those numbers, 0.47, 0.3, you see them as they go on down. Those are what we talk about as the crash rate. We've talked to you before about some of these where for every 1 million vehicles that enter an intersection, this is how often we expect to get a crash. The good news is a lot of those, when you go looking down that list, you see 0.4, things like that, even smaller numbers. Really the only one to point out to your attention down there is Round, which was up a little above the state average, which I highlighted there, which is 0.8. It was a little above, but things were done at Round. It was initially signalized, but then there were some problems with left turn crashes. Changes were made down there that I'm sure you've all driven through with the lane elimination. You move over and you got left turn lanes in there. The good news with that is it was a tremendous help in that there's been 0 crashes out at Round since those changes were made. The trick is that's kind of an interim type improvement because over time, as the road gets busier, having the single lane, the merging, can start to create some conflict out there. But key point with all of it is that very limited injuries, which is a very good thing. Very limited number of injuries out there in the corridor, and for the most part, the rate, like I say, what's going on is fairly low. Other key component to what we look at are the traffic forecasts. What do we think traffic is going to go to? Where is it at today? Where is it going? This chart you have right here is essentially you see that blue line across the lower part of the chart. That's where volumes are out there today with information we collected, plus taking a look back at historic information from the city and the Department of Transportation. And then you see what we project on that upper line, kind of the orange-brown line there, of where we think the growth potential is for the corridor over time. We use 2045 as a year. It seems like a lot of years out there, but again, we're dealing with a road that, was built around 91, 92, and here we are now in 2018 starting to look at things. So it won't be that far away. But plenty of potential there for growth when you look at really even just the immediate land use that's through the corridor available, a lot of the Pinnacle area. And then, it's Green Hill itself still having connectivity both east and west and the area it serves. So you look at it and essentially you're dealing with volumes that could double over time. Again, this is over time. A lot of things dictate that. To tell you exactly when that will occur, again, it's just a function of how's the economy keep going, land use keeps happening. Do you have growth in residential, growth in office and retail in the area? Those things all equate to trips. So, but the key is that potential is still there. So when we started looking at things related to, improvements out there, number one, again, safety. We always want to start from that point and ask ourselves, what do we think we need to make things as safe as possible? Even though I mentioned our crash rate isn't that bad, it's still a very paramount part of our decision making. Then we start to look at the other things, how's our traffic in the peak hour, the non-peak times, so those couple hours of the day when things are really busy versus how are things flowing other times. The city and their adopted complete streets policy is important to us, as well as we take a look at a lot of other things, right-of-way impacts, and then costs. And a key thing we did in this study, which I know you've looked at in some other things with university decisions, was we really tried to look at more of the overall costs related to the project. Not just doing an improvement at an intersection, the construction costs only, but what are the costs to the public, how that intersection operates, how it'll function over time. So putting together kind of more of a total dollar estimate when we look at it. And then we did put a little bit of information into it as best we could with the timing of the needs, when we thought, changes might be necessary. So this next chart we're looking at is the corridor operations. Again, you've had us traffic folks up here before speaking to you, and we talk about that level of service where we give a grade to an intersection of how it works, A to F. As you remember, A is great, F is not working well. Essentially, the black line you see across the middle of the chart is what we look at as that design level. D is when the volume of demand going through an intersection equals the ability of that intersection to handle it. So usually we're trying to aim for something a little bit above that when we design an intersection, set it up to operate. And so that's why you see it in there kind of between D and C. And the point to you there is you look at all the intersections across, and we put the symbol down there at the bottom to remind you of what's a signal, what's a stop sign on the side street out there. But it's really looking at those and understanding with today's traffic, you look, and essentially South Main and Cedar Heights, they tend to operate just right down there at that point of the volume to the capacity is getting pretty equal. Now that's during that peak hour. It's not a lot of the other hours of the day, but during that peak time, which in turn is how a lot of the citizenry will judge some of the intersections, because those are times when they're the busiest and people driving through there. But again, you see kind of the two intersections there that are a little below, but the others are right down around that C-B area. Now, when you look at the blue bar for each intersection, that's 2045. So that's if we go out there and say we generate more traffic out of all these land uses that we think are going to happen. What happens to the intersection? Don't make any changes. Everything's just as it is today. So what happens to how would it operate if that increased demand would occur at the intersection? So as you might expect, you look at a lot of those blue lines, they'll go down because essentially the demand goes way up at the intersection. And if you don't make any changes, no lanes, no signals, no roundabouts, anything, it will deteriorate. So this next chart takes us forward a little more. Now we start to say, well, again, that future traffic we were talking about out there on the horizon, what happens if we start to look at alternatives at the intersections to address, okay, we had that poor level of service, gee, we're at E or F. What do we need to do to improve that? So what you have in this chart is showing you the differences between the colors there. The light blue, we'll just start right at the very west end at Hudson. You see the light blue representing signalization, continuing signalization, but doing the other improvements, adding some turn lanes that are necessary at the intersection to give it an improved capacity. And then the brown line next to it is if you treat it as a roundabout, how would it change? So kind of a comparative in that level of service of how do they perform. So as you look across there. And an example like Algonquin, you see the very first one of a stop sign showing it very low. Well, in the future, if we anticipate that, say, the hospital does come in to the north, you get more development to the south. If you were just to leave it two-way stop control, add another leg to the intersection, obviously it'll struggle a little more in how to operate. So then when you go to a signal or a roundabout, clearly it improves how it performs. If you work all the way across the intersections, you can just kind of see comparatively how those go. South Main, Prairie, some of the ones that have signals at them, and comparing signal or talking about is roundabout an appropriate option for the future. The ones I put the asterisks on, Ashworth, Estate, Orchard Hill, Green Creek, those are intersections that we don't anticipate that you would do some extra level of traffic control. Even though the performance is down there a little lower, it's very typical. You have a busy arterial road, you have a minor side street. During that 30, 40 minutes of an evening, you may experience some delay. But again, we don't think the volume's enough to mandate that you'd make that decision of putting in a traffic signal or putting in a roundabout. So I wanted to point those out to you. We looked at these alternative benefits and costs. Again, considering the construction cost, looking at a 20-year life is typical of what we look at with the project, even though, we usually hope to make those infrastructure items last longer than that. But the safety, again, putting dollar loss into safety, it's a way to examine that. And other user operating costs, just the travel time of drivers going through intersections. I mean, the reality is there's a dollar value to everyone driving through an intersection, whether it be goods or whether it just be a citizen traveling somewhere. We put all that together, and we also tried to factor in maintenance costs, basic costs in there that for the long term for the community of taking care of the intersection. Signals don't just sit there and run on their own for 20 years. You got to take care of them, do maintenance, roundabouts, marking, signing, things like that. So all those things factored into this cost. Again, another chart for you, a lot of information here, but what you have before you with this chart is putting everything into a present value, okay, of looking at just an annual cost and $100,000 per year, if you will. And what we've stacked up is all those costs I just mentioned to you. Starting from the bottom on any one of those, you see the construction in that tan color, looking at the cost of crashes. And then the big one you will notice on a lot of these is that travel time factor. That time of people traveling through intersections, when you start to factor that into the peak hour, the non-peak hours, all the days of the week, and so on into a year, there's a lot of time there that goes into that. And then you'll see some at the very top for fuel costs, emission, pollutants, and then the last one, maintenance in there. But as you look across that graph across the bottom, you will see there's a couple there together. Hudson, treated as signal, treated as a roundabout. Algonquin, treated as a signal, treated as a roundabout. So again, these intersections where we know we either have current traffic control or where we feel you're going to need traffic control in the future to allow people to get it into Green Hill, come in off the side street, we did this comparison of the intersection improvements as alternatives to try to see how things stacked up. And this is, if your staff refer to it or us refer to it in other places in our report and presentation, this life cycle cost analysis. So again, puts it into an annualized cost of how does everything stack up. Because initially with a lot of these things, when we talk about improvements, many of these you'll see, again, just look at that tan across the bottom, a signal versus a roundabout. The signal improvements may have a lesser cost for construction versus the roundabout, but then when you look at the other costs associated with it, that's where sometimes then a signal takes over and costs a little more over a roundabout. Okay? So we took a look at that all the way through for all these intersections. So now we're just kind of going to walk through these and go through all of them. And really I'll just keep moving through these and key so we can have a lot of opportunity for question and answer. Hudson Road, again, there it's just about some safety and capacity in the future. Again, there we really feel like staying with the signal, adding turn lanes. There's some key issues to that in that some of the truck traffic traveling through the intersection, even though the roundabouts can be designed for the negotiation of the trucks. We think that's key to it. The other things we looked at a number of years ago when we looked at Hudson was the traffic associated with UNI. There's just enough special events and other things that you get some surges in traffic coming through there that in a lot of ways the signal system you have, doing more specific operations with that, it gives some ability to kind of more clearly get traffic through there as needed. So that intersection I put over there on the right, that's that little snippet of that bar chart I just showed you a little bit ago to show you those comparisons. So again, there's just kind of a picture of Hudson we show with, you notice the northbound right turn lane, you see the addition of a westbound left turn lane in there, and also some widening on the west side to match up. So we get those lefts across from each other, which makes for a safer operation. Algonquin, again, it's kind of a toss-up between the signal and the roundabout and the way they behave. That one, we think it'll be a question of, as you look at things with development driven through the hospital, when that may occur, how do you add another leg to that intersection to the north side. It'll kind of change how that operates, and we think a signal would be a simple solution there and could work fine when the time actually comes. So again, there you just see an Algonquin, and again, visualize Green Hill being just a basic 4 lanes, adding in left turn lanes out there on Green Hill, and then signalize if warranted. Ashworth, really just very similar. You get to that point of where traffic grows enough on Green Hill that over time you need to consider adding left turn lanes out there. And really what that would be is just kind of a continuation of left turn lane from Hudson. You just carry it eastward through these intersections, because they are still, even though there's a pretty good distance between them, by the time you'd kind of taper down and taper back out, you'd just be better to widen it all the way through. Okay, South Main Street. So we jump over 58. In South Main, we just wanted to remind you that there was some interim work done there. Again, that's kind of what precipitated a lot of conversations at the first meeting was the concerns with there had been a lot of diversion traffic coming out of the 58 and Viking construction. And so some things were done there to add some arrows for turning. It was just getting to the point of additional traffic, difficult for people to get left turns made. And those things were done by the city at the intersection. Kind of in the middle of the study, early on in the study, what we did there. No change in geometry, just change in how the signal worked, but it did help things. On the other side, though, is that by adding those arrows, it took away from our 60 seconds in a minute as we divide up that green time out there. And so it can also start to lead to other delays, like for the westbound traffic where there's only the single through lane, because people have to wait a little longer now to bring up an arrow from another direction. Again, it's these things where we kind of squeeze in one direction, but then something's got to give in the other direction. So some increases in delay out there with it. So then you look at South Main Street, though, talking more longer term. And again, we look at that, we see the comparisons of the two of how they kind of operate, one signal versus a roundabout and the costs. Key in there, I would note there's some constructability issues to it. There's a lot of utilities that are very obvious. They're above ground. You see them when you're out there, large utility pole. There's a lot of different communications that run through that corridor. There's just a lot of things that over time have been put in that corridor in a north-south direction. But there would also need to be some right-of-way that would be associated with the roundabout. I'll pop this up on the screen for you. What you see there, get your orientation, north is up on that. So you see we brought in the Fairway site plan from down there in the southeast corner to give you kind of a perspective of how that fits in there. And again, we're fortunate in that there is a decent amount of right-of-way through there on that west side, but it kind of pinches in the northeast corner and the southwest corner. You can see that there if you focus on the blue, purple of the sidewalk. You can note how the right-of-way line's in red. You can see how it starts to, abut in on that. And certainly in that northeast corner, there's also a grade change as well. If you can visualize it out there, the fencing, it sits up quite a ways from the intersection. Probably my eye height, 5-6 feet. So that would also be an interesting challenge to it in what's there. But that shows you how the roundabout really, if you look at if you focus on the green lines are actually the existing pavement curbs out there. So, it gives you an idea, and you've all experienced this with University as you've seen that corridor change. of kind of the different kind of footprint you get to an intersection when you go from a signal to a roundabout. Estate and Coneflower, again, not as many things there that are needed, really just looking at long-term, some turn lanes, east-west. Don't think the need will be there for signalization in what we see in the way it operates, nor adding future traffic to it. But again, you get back to that 4-lane of Green Hill, turns into more of a 5-lane with left turn lanes in the center part. Prairie. Again, it's kind of one of these safety and capacity things. You've got the 4 lanes out there. Left turning traffic is increasing a lot. If you'll notice there in the recommendation, we do have an interim recommendation there of talking about what we call a leading left turn signal, that without adding any physical pavement, any turn lane, the ability is there because there's definitely a greater demand. There's well over, I think it's over 120 an hour now, over several hours of the day turning left, and they have enough conflict coming at them, it can get kind of difficult. So we think there could be some gain and some safety out there by introducing the left arrow that would come up for those folks if they get queued up on the one side trying to turn on to Prairie Parkway. Very little opposition from the other direction. Again, that's an interim thing, kind of like South Main. It's something that can be done with the signal with not a tremendous investment, but a little bit of safety benefit there and how it operates, or just take some delay away for folks. But Prairie long-term, we think, again, it's another intersection that we think can have some advantages to working as a roundabout and how it will function. It's got a lot of peak demand with it, especially to the south coming out of Pinnacle Prairie over there. And so it's one of those where you get a lot of hours where maybe that signalization isn't quite as necessary, but yet during those peak times you need to handle things. And that's certainly one of the really nice aspects of the roundabout, is it can keep everybody moving at some of those off times when you don't need to totally stop one direction or the other, but then handle things when you need to during the peak. Again, as we move on through the corridor, one of the nice parts about Green Hill now as we really move to the east is the wide open right-of-way through there. Doesn't mean you want to tear all that up, but it's an aspect of the corridor that really, way back when, the vision of that, of gaining all that right-of-way as they built that corridor, it gives us a lot of latitude to do things in there. And still have the features of the trail and all the pedestrian aspects that make it kind of nice. Orchard Hill, long-term, again, don't see as many things there of need. Again, basically, turn lanes with it over time. Again, that same function of waiting to make that left turn out on Green Hill. You start to get to be where you're hanging out in the road. Somebody else is driving in a through lane. So create those turn lanes to get people out of the way, really for safety more than anything. But again, we don't believe signalization will be needed there. With the south, the drive goes into the church, and as we understand, that's kind of the end of it. Won't be mixing on down as another street. And then to the north, really, there's other avenues by which, to get to signals if needed, or if they become roundabouts, other ways to get out onto the corridor. Oster, again, future safety is probably what we foresee there more than anything. It'll be difficult as traffic gets busier on the corridor to get out. Oster's got the potential to grow to the south as it goes down through the Pinnacle Prairie area, and so you've got that opportunity where more traffic's just going to probably be introduced to the situation. So things there for you to consider is really the idea of needing some sort of traffic control longer term. And again, we've come around. You're seeing kind of a consistent theme here as we talk about it, but believe that by the time you start looking at doing turn lane signalization, looking at those costs of the contemplations of that, a roundabout may be as effective. And the other thing that we didn't really mention to you is, something we did do in this was we tried to look at the pavement. The reality is that pavement's approaching 30 years old. On the other hand, it's actually performing pretty well out there. Down by Cedar Heights, it's definitely got some more problems with raveling and failure and just, starting to go. But through some of these other intersections, it's performed well. But again, as we look at these type of recommendations, some of these we could still be talking, it might be another 10 years or farther out. So again, knowing that pavement's going to just kind of continue to decline over time. So at some point, there will be patching efforts, other things done, so those costs factored in. Round, again, safety and capacity, the signal was added several years ago, and, that started from probably a standpoint of, gosh, it was kind of hard to get out there, and you're starting to see some things, maybe crashes from the side street, difficulty getting out, so signalization was added. Then, what that did was you signalize a 4-lane, sometimes you have that problem with when you put signals on a 4-lane, that left turn crash started to develop out on the main line. And again, the reaction was made to that, again, of the merging with the traffic that's out on Green Hill today. It works, but over time, with the speed through there and as the volume comes up, all that merging down to a single lane, won't be as efficient as you'd like it to be to carry things. So long-term, again, you think you keep an eye on that, you see how it's doing, how it's behaving and performing. And then, again, if you notice the time frame specifically on this one, we said we think it could be another 10 years out. It could be some time. So it's not that investment of infrastructure and things that were done it was a very short-term thing that was of no use. It's still going to perform and do what it needs to do. Again, Round, like Oster, you've got that connectivity issue of, it's going to become a little more continuous. It's a somewhat of a, collector through street going on northward. Well, it's going to have that same type of thing down in the Pinnacle Prairie area of connecting down eventually to down to Viking in that area. So again, you've got the potential for it being more of a through street. And, again, I'd point back to, as I've been going through these, we have those chart comparisons in there of signal versus roundabout and that annualized cost we put together. Round, that just shows you the layout. There's a few more things we have to do in there to shift things. We're trying to keep it a little south of Green Hill Drive to the north. So there's a little shift, and that's why you see a little more maneuvering of Green Hill out there and a little more curvature to it as we look at it. It's a little tougher because in doing that, it would be having to solve that someday and figure out how do you impinge on the right-of-way. We've got more right-of-way to the north, but yet Green Hill Drive is in there close. So we're trying to shift from that. We don't have the right-of-way as much to the south, but the areas, you look at the churches that are down there and their parking lots the way they are, at least it would appear, it's not areas, say, of significant usage as far as those corners. Not trying to belittle that right-of-way, but that's just kind of the reality of how it's being used and what's out there. A couple more. Green Creek. Again, fairly simple intersection, really fairly simple there. It's keeping an eye on safety and just making sure, it's a T, talking through with staff and everything we've kind of looked at. There's no real thought process that there's going to be another leg to that intersection to the north to just connect it up to Green Hill Drive. So it'll probably just stay this T intersection. Development off of it is kind of limited. It becomes that function of over time, someone waiting to turn left in because of Green Hill traffic. Again, as a left turner, you're stopped sitting in that through lane where somebody else might be coming along. And unfortunately, we continue to deal with distracted drivers and issues related to that. So that'll just be a safety monitoring issue. Lastly, Cedar Heights. Again, a lot of things there, safety, the capacity and how it operates, maintenance. As we said, some of that concrete is starting to fail out there. It's not performing quite as well over time, so it's getting to the point of needing to repair good portions of that intersection. So again, that one, the split phase signal, I've stood up here and talked to you about split phase signals before in some other corridors. They serve a function on a short term of definitely making a difference as far as safety, but they have their downside of being very inefficient. And so it's trying to decide in there of when to make those changes. So, we recommend removing that split phase and then consider reconstruction of it as a roundabout. I know part of it was in the CIP looking at really Cedar Heights, I believe, from there a little further south and the widening and everything there. But, this may be the opportunity to do a project with that. The good news is when you look at it, again, we're fortunate in that you've got a pretty wide open intersection in what's out there as far as the land use, and really even the closest driveway. The church in the northeast corner has that driveway that comes down, but there might be some opportunity there to just, we think it's enough of an impact, just flip that driveway to the north to the other side of the parking lot as a possibility if needed. But there you see the layout of Cedar Heights. Again, a lot of pavement repair going in with that one eventually, so that's kind of that trade-off when you do look at the roundabout. It's envisioning, again, you envision University and what you've just worked through on that. You have a lot of that pavement where you've got to reconstruct in order to get the proper alignment and everything, but again, some of that pavement is reaching its life. So that walks you through a lot of it. Pedestrians, bicyclists, just wanted to make sure that you knew that that was an important part of what we looked at too. We've got a lot of unique opportunities out there in that corridor because of the nice trail system, all the sidewalk that's out there. There's a lot of good things that are already in place. There's good separation from the road, so we really see things working pretty well out there. There's a few places, there's still a little bit of discontinuity with sidewalk, but you know, those things are going to come in with development, I would assume, before long. There's been a little bit of conflict. The side trails, some of that's just still a goal of those that are using the trail. You know, bicyclists being heads up with drivers and vice versa, paying attention as they go through a corridor like that. It's nice, and it lends itself to getting going on a trail like that because you don't have a lot of other driveways and other conflicts. The intersections are farther apart, but again, it's kind of that people forget. Cars forget to look for bikes, and bikes forget to look for cars. But overall, things pretty good. There are some things in there with the signals, updating and all the push buttons, the displays, you know, for the countdown timers, things of that nature that you're seeing more. You know, these are a little more minor things that can be done, but, you know, we heard a lot of feedback from folks of saying, you know, getting across intersections. We provided a lot of timing information for the staff and some technical memos about things we thought would be logical to update. So with that, done a lot of talking. I promised Stephanie I'd keep it to 35 minutes, and I think I've done that, at least this far. So I'm here to try to help answer any questions. It's a lot of information, I know. But overall, again, trying to kind of set a vision. When we started this, it was talking about setting a vision for the future of what to do with the intersections as more things start to occur at them, and well, what's the next step? I would love to take this opportunity too to compliment the public we dealt with out there. It was a very nice opportunity to have public meetings and have people have a lot of just good conversation. Everybody, it was great. There would be things you may disagree on something about what we were suggesting or what we were recommending, but people were great at all the meetings and sharing their thoughts and comments. They sent a lot of emails to John and Stephanie, put handwritten comments in the boxes we provided, and it was nice to just have a lot of meetings where the meetings went pretty long. We were in there for a while, but I mean, it was a lot of good, healthy conversation. So I do want to compliment all the neighbors out there that, again, we all have our different reasons for why we believe in one thing or the other, but it was nice to be able to do it that way, work with them.
Very good, thank you. Open up to council. Questions for Mark? Mr. Whelan?
I have a couple of questions for you. One is looking at the Green Hill South Main roundabout. If you look at the roundabout, there's what's called an extended median that blocks people from Balboa turning north. If you look at the signalized intersection, there's no extended median, so people from Balboa can turn north and go into town.
Pardon me.
The arguments come forward from one of the citizens that there's also an argument at Boulder and University where Boulder had an extended median that kept people from turning toward Boulder. That was dropped before the final plan was laid.
Right.
So you have two examples of where that extended median shouldn't be needed. In the case of a signalized intersection, I would think you need an extended median more because of queuing. Traffic piles up, but with a roundabout, traffic flows smoothly. So you don't tend to get the bunches going out all at once, except maybe at quitting time. But the question is, can we reduce that extended median like we did on Boulder? And it certainly seems like a good idea to me.
Yeah. We introduced the median as we talked about things. We heard a lot of feedback from folks, the neighborhood over there off of Balboa, and they talked a lot about getting out at that intersection. I know there's a lot of different things through just sitting there trying to deal with traffic, looking left and right, and then maybe when the signal turns green, people pick up speed, or they come around because it's a bigger intersection, the corner's a little larger, so maybe they take it at a higher rate of speed. I think there's opportunity in there. We looked at it because of concerns with it, and we thought long-term for safety benefits, That was the logic behind doing it. If it didn't show for the signal, I believe we had it in there, we just may not have highlighted it. We had the same idea for the signalized intersection as well, unless I don't have
That
something clear in
didn't
a
show up on
drawing.
it.
But we can, I don't know, we have that queued up, but pretty sure we had it in there as well, because either way, we're looking at saying we thought we'd have those issues. That said, it's one of these things you have to look at from a safety standpoint of, we were hearing input of that it's difficult to make the turn out of here. And so at some point, do you get to the point of if it's difficulty to make the turn, well, then is the turn so problematic that, we take it out of there?
Yeah.
The reality of the numbers, yours talk about it, it is kind of, as we look at the cold hard facts, we did not associate any crashes with that intersection in particular over we look at 5 years of history. So, that is the other side of it. For concerns about it being bad, there haven't been any crashes with it either. So, I think there's a lot of things in the design that can be
Just to
considered.
add to it, it worked at Balboa, or it worked at Boulder.
Yeah.
Why not shorten it? If it becomes a problem, you can always extend it. It's not something that you have to have.
Yeah.
And if it works the other way, which I think it would, my opinion, you wouldn't need to extend it.
Right.
On the other hand, you can always throw some more cement there if it becomes a traffic queuing problem.
I don't
So
disagree.
I would hope that you would reconsider that.
Okay.
Did you have any more questions, Mr. Whelan, or did you wrap it all on the?
I had one more question. Is it possible to move that roundabout on Green Hill a little further to the east and encroach more on the Fairway property?
the South
The reason
Main.
I raised that is a question was raised to me.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. Again, I would offer that, we did a planning study here. We're not into design yet, have surveyed those types of things. We're looking at the details of it. When we approach a lot of these, we try to do a conservative layout, number one. So we feel like we're showing as a big a footprint as we think we would need, whether it be a normal intersection or a roundabout. And the other thing, usually when we go into these at the start, is we try to pick what we think is best, just based on kind of the simple layout of it, of looking the features that are out there, before we get the information on the final information on survey, other utilities, things that might have to be avoided. Again, there's opportunities for this roundabout it could shrink a little bit. There can be some things that could be moved with it. So by all means, this drawing that you have before you is to give you the idea of the basic shape and footprint of one, but certainly by no means is it the final staking of where you'd start building one. So I think there's opportunity there for some fine tuning of how it would sit in the crosshairs of the intersection. Yes.
Thank you.
Anyone further? Sue?
I guess I want a little more commitment there, that regardless of the intersection on South Main, that Balboa, which has not had accidents currently, needs to remain open. You were worried about emissions and time, yet if you make it a right-in, right-out only, all traffic's either got to go way out of their way on Cordoba or turn and go south several blocks to turn around, which is emissions, gas,
Yep.
waste of time.
Right.
So I want to know everything we can do to keep Balboa open.
Sure. And I think it goes back to considering it for a safety consideration, and Councilman Whelan's comment of, can you add and change something later if something starts to happen? That's the thing, if you design it upright with room out there to make an adaptation later, that is a possibility.
And I know another thing that was important to the residents was to keep the sound barrier fence. Have you incorporated that into this plan?
We didn't get into the specifics of the fence and looking at that. It would be, I know it sits back towards the right-of-way line, so it'd be the consideration of how that would stay put. Any updates or anything on the?
I would just say that we did include funding in the next CIP that's awaiting approval to do work on that fencing. So that is not part of their design. It would be incorporated into the next phase of the actual design work, but we've tried to put money in there and budget for work on either restoring or reconstructing that sound wall.
Anything further from council right now? Mr. Frank?
I just want to add, I support what Dave was talking about as far as Green Hill, the southwest, if we could move that roundabout a little bit, and it sounds like there's still planning that can be done around that, so I appreciate you being open to that intersection. I've got a question for Ron or Stephanie or John, somebody, Cedar Heights, when we rebuild Cedar Heights South, we're going to do that sometime in the near future. Will there be, unrelated to this, bicycle accommodations or any adding of a sidewalk on Cedar Heights going south?
We'll be looking at all of that in the design. We're looking to get a contract for design probably in another month or two so that we can start working on that.
'Cause it didn't look like on that roundabout there was really any access to the south. But I want to thank you guys for doing such a great job and having the public meetings open and getting all the feedback. It's looks like an exciting project.
I have
Anything
one other
further from
question.
council? Yes, Mr. Burr.
You talked about the growth of the corridor up to 2045. And my question is it appears that the traffic from University Avenue, a lot of it is shifted to Green Hill. Was any of that incorporated into this when you looked at your traffic model for 2045 as to whether or not traffic would go back to University Avenue or whether or not you expect it to remain on Green Hill?
We did look at, when we took some new counts, University, let's see, these would have been in the summer. We took these in the, well, spring of 18, because we made sure to get out there and get some information before you and I was done for the year. So University still would have been under the amount of construction that was still going on here in the tail end of the spring. Some things down here a little more in kind of the western end of the corridor. I know we specifically made some adjustments related to 58 and Viking, because we felt we definitely had some traffic that was diverted in going through, and in particular between Prairie Parkway and South Main. University, I guess we didn't have any particular things that suggested to us that there were great amounts of traffic, again, that had changed to it, so we did not make any adjustments for that. If there's a feeling that there was a lot of diversion from University down to Green Hill. But we think that potential is kind of still there as much because of the land use, probably more than anything.
Anything further from council? Be happy to welcome folks here with public comment, just to keep it under 5 minutes as always. But you're welcome to come up.
Good evening, my name is Penny Pop. I live at 4805 South Main. Imagine back to 1985. Different folks occupied those chairs here in this chamber. Neighbors gathered together to form the Green Hill Road Citizens Committee. The project became reality with the cooperation of all. The Citizens Committee and our city government and staff worked together to envision a new corridor to service the growing city they called home. The vision that became Green Hill Corridor has served us well. New developments rose around the corridor, set back far enough to maintain the green belt. Trails were added and maintained. The pavement itself has far outlasted the projected life. A great testament to this project is the number of our neighbors who would stay in their homes 20, 30, and even 40 years. And yes, even original members of the Green Hill Road Citizens Committee. Tonight we've heard the recommendations for an updated Green Hill Corridor. What an interesting, progressive, conceptual plan. Many of our neighbors followed the progression of this plan through the public informational meetings, as well as further discussions at the South Main and Green Hill Corridor Neighborhood Association meetings. The use of roundabouts throughout the corridor may be the answer to current and future growth in our area. But the recommendation of a roundabout at the South Main and Green Hill Road intersection has brought up many interesting comments, questions, and concerns that need to be addressed. I can honestly say that our neighbors are split on the recommendation. 50% favor a roundabout option, and 50% favor a signalization option. So what are some of those comments, questions, and concerns that need to be addressed? The 2014 ACOM study recommends signals at Green Hill and Main. What exactly has changed? What is the total projected cost for this project, and how will it be funded? Will the citizens of Cedar Falls be able to vote for this project? The South Main and Green Hill intersection is the only area in the corridor where residential and commercial areas do not maintain the green belt because of pre-existing homes. Do we need to consider that? I believe you referred to that as the right-of-way. Costs to move all utilities are expected to run between an estimated $500,000 to $1 million for the roundabout option. Utility costs for a signalization option, under $20,000. These costs should be considered in the total overall project estimations. What about bike and pedestrian safety? Our neighborhood association reached out to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, but they were unable to point us to more information or studies about safety at roundabouts. The needs of our community are unique. A stable population at Western Home must be taken into consideration for when addressing safety for all. The fence along Green Hill has fallen into disrepair. It'll need to be replaced as part of this project. How much will that cost? But more on that later on this evening in public forum. Councilman Whelan mentioned our concerns about the right-in, right-out on Balboa. That is another issue that will need to be addressed. As you can see, in either option, roundabout or signalization, the median is a big issue on Balboa. Many of the new roundabouts in Cedar Falls have unique traffic flow patterns, disrupting the driver from safely maneuvering each option. We need to provide some continuity in our roads and in our traffic flow. These are but a few of the comments, questions, and concerns we continue to have. As president of the South Main and Green Hill Corridor Neighborhood Association, I would urge you to further consider the recommendation for the intersection of Green Hill and Main. When action is taken on this study, please direct staff to further investigate the best option for this intersection. Have them take into consideration the cost to the family who gave up land originally for Green Hill and now is being asked again to give up more land. Have them investigate and learn about how traffic patterns may change once Fairway and the Public Safety Building opens. And most of all, include our neighbors. Ask us for information. We've lived there. What will this mean for the construction timeline for the intersection? It may mean that we should take a breath and pause and follow the example set over 30 years ago. Gather all the information first before starting the retrofit of this intersection. I believe it'll be worth the wait. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Penny. Mr. Skane?
Jim Skane, 2215 Clay Street. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for this opportunity to talk about a topic that is very close to my mind and my heart, because I have spent hours and hours and hours looking at what happened to University Avenue. And I would urge you not to let happen to Green Hill and the various intersections that happened to University. And I will talk more about that in my presentation during the forum. I have been impressed, and added to that impression, being impressed, was what the representative from Snyder said about Round Street on University. One, he didn't mention specifically, the cost of redoing that, but he did mention that the turn lanes were added. He did mention that in 2018, there have been no accidents. And it's interesting because that model is the model that he described for some of the roads on Green Hill, but not the ones where he wants to put roundabouts. South Hill could be fixed, Green Hill at South Main could be fixed by just extending a right turn lane and then a turn lane from the east onto South Main. And it's exactly the same as he said would be needed in other places. Round Street could be fixed in that same way. The thing that I'm stressing is that we don't need roundabouts because roundabouts break corridors as they have broken University. I drive it as often as I can, and I have never found more than 3 cars that are heading west from the Waterloo Road roundabout down to the Holiday roundabout. Now, there may be some that come in and take the bump out to go into the access roads and into the other, but going through, see, there is no through traffic on University, none. And in that particular situation, we have lost our corridor because the people at the DOT that's had the 2012 study talked about traffic of 22,000, okay? 22,000 a day. We probably only have 100 to 200,000, and 2,000. And of course, almost all of the traffic is congregated around Boulder roundabout. Now, in what we just saw, it was beautiful because the representative from Snyder said that if we fix these intersections without roundabouts, it costs $760,000. To fix a roundabout in there that makes it unsafe and unreliable, then it takes $2.1 to $2.8 million. Now, I don't think that you people are not fiscal conservatives. I mean, the council certainly was not fiscal conservative in 2015 when they authorized the roundabouts because the amount that they had to spend has been doubled. But I'll talk more later. But thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Skeen, you bet. Anyone further? Very good. We will move on to the next item in our agenda, which is the Middle Cedar Watershed Plan update. I think Planner David Sturch, is he introducing tonight? From the back, amazing.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for this time here to present an update on the Middle Cedar Watershed Plan. Tonight, I'd like to introduce a couple of gentlemen here. Larry Weber's from the Hydroscience and Engineering Department at University of Iowa. He's going to kind of just give a quick overview of the watershed approach, and then he's going to pass the mic to Pat Conrad. He is our consultant that has been working on the preparation of the plan. So With that in mind, I'd like to pass the mic over to Larry here.
Great, welcome.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, thanks for your time this evening. It's really my pleasure to be here. Lifelong Iowan, grew up in Dyersville up in northeast Iowa, and now a faculty member at the University of Iowa. Directed the water program there called IIHR Hydroscience and Engineering for about 13 years. Created the Iowa Flood Center, the Iowa Nutrient Center, and brought the Iowa Geologic Survey to our program. So that program focuses on groundwater to surface water, from flood to drought, from water quantity to water quality. One of the projects that we've been involved in is looking at flood mitigation at the watershed scale. That began with some funding back in 2010. The state received disaster recovery monies from the 2008 disaster year. That year, the state received $92 million. 10 of it went towards the creation of watershed management authorities, an education program for flood awareness, and $8.8 million of that $10 million went into a pilot project to look at holding water back on private lands for public benefit during heavy rainfall periods. As that project was finishing up in the Upper Cedar, we did a project there. We built about $1.5 million of wetlands for holding water back and processing nutrients. We also worked in the Turkey River and down in southeast Iowa in Soap and Chicquest Creeks. We could demonstrate about a 20% reduction in stream flow if we concentrated about $1.5 million in a small sub-watershed with these conservation practices. As that program was nearing its end, Housing and Urban Development drew back about $500 million of disaster recovery monies. The Rockefeller Foundation put in $500 million, and together they formed a national disaster resilience competition with $1 billion. It was targeting Superstorm Sandy recovery in New York and New Jersey and across the eastern seaboard, but many other states and jurisdictions around the country also had presidential disaster declarations around 2012. The state of Iowa submitted a pre-proposal along with 62 other jurisdictions in the United States. We were one of 40 invited for a full proposal submission. At that time, the governor's office asked if I would help to lead the development of the Iowa proposal. We submitted a proposal that was awarded $96,899,177 in January of 2016. $40 million focused on urban stormwater management in Dubuque, Coralville, and Storm Lake, and $40 million that'll go into rural conservation practices in 8 watersheds in Iowa. From the Upper Iowa, the Upper Wapsipinicon, the Middle Cedar, Clear Creek, the English River, North Raccoon, and in far southwest Iowa, the East and West Nishnabotna rivers. Of those 8 watersheds, the Middle Cedar will receive about $8.4 million in conservation work in a 90-10 cost share program. So this grant will provide 90% of the cost of building wetlands, farm ponds, reconnected floodplains, and also practices for nitrate removal, like saturated buffers, bioreactors, and other programs for nitrate removal. Together, it is a rural-urban partnership that looks to hold water back where it falls during heavy rainfall and improve water quality all the time. We start with forming a WMA, then we do a hydrologic assessment, and a watershed plan. This comes through many partnerships. The State of Iowa program was very unique and identified as such with Housing and Urban Development. You can see here our partners include from farm commodity groups and the Iowa Farm Bureau to cities and counties, also conservation groups with the Nature Conservancy, Ducks Unlimited, and the state universities, state agencies, so many people involved in this. HUD really is looking to Iowa for leadership in this program to develop a program that could be replicable across the Midwest and across the country. State of Iowa in that $96.9 million award was the 4th largest recipient in this program. New York got the highest amount, New Jersey was the 2nd highest, and New Orleans was the 3rd highest. So it's a real testament to the partnerships that we have here. The nice thing is forming these watershed management authorities provides a local infrastructure for developing these hydrologic assessment and watershed plans. Pat will talk about the watershed plan that's being developed as a 20-year plan. So we have a WMA formed, a plan that will guide them for 20 years, and then it's just a matter of putting boots on the ground and practices on the ground towards implementation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Pat, and I'd be happy to take any questions after Pat's presentation.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
Well, great, thank you. It's an honor to be here to talk to you guys about our watershed management plan. Pat Conrad with Emmons and Olivier Resources. We're a water water resource engineering firm up in the Twin Cities, and I'm a watershed planner, been involved with the Middle Cedar since its inception. So what I'd like to talk to you about today is obviously the watershed management plan. You can see the physical extents of the Middle Cedar watershed, and when we talk about watershed management, we talk about managing the lands and the watershed contributing to a particular water resource, in this case, the reach of the Cedar River from about Cedar Rapids, or Cedar Falls, Waterloo, down through Cedar Rapids. So you can see the membership of the WMA, the cities and the counties. And it's important to note that, you know, this is one of the bigger, more prestigious, more prominent watersheds in the watershed approach. I think it has the most energy, it has the most partnerships already established, and of any of the watersheds, I think this one has the best shot at being successful in the long term, again, due to the commitment of the various partners that are involved in this WMA, private and public partnerships. So going through the watershed management planning process, you've all been involved in other planning efforts, and it's like no other. It's like all others. It starts with an issues identification phase where we look at what are the problems, what are the issues, what are the concerns within that watershed, go through an establishment of goals, setting, and then develop those actions to meet those goals. In watershed management planning, it's very important to be built on a very strong technical foundation. So we start off with an assessment of the watershed. So we look at flooding. You guys are very familiar with the flooding that occurs along the Cedar River, but we also have flooding that occurs on many of the tributaries, including Beaver Creek and Black Hawk Creek that kind of flow into town. So we look at flooding losses, losses per acre, losses per capita. We assemble all this information across the watershed. We look at water quality. We're all familiar with the water quality issues in the Gulf of Mexico, the hypoxia, the dead zone. We also have water quality issues closer to home. We have drinking water impairments in the Cedar River down in Cedar Rapids. We have various impairments throughout the watershed as well. Many of our smaller streams have elevated bacteria concentrations that make it unsafe for swimming and even wading. So we've got primary recreation impairments on some of our smaller streams, which coincides with some of the streams that are more actively used. So we've got recreational opportunities throughout the watershed, areas where people are canoeing, they're paddling, they're wading, they're expecting to be able to use those streams without concern for health concerns. We've got, in addition to surface water issues, we've got issues with our drinking water. So in this watershed, as is the case with many areas within the state of Iowa, we have a situation where our drinking water supplies are very heavily influenced by that surface water. There's a really very tight connection between the surface water quality, and then that can show up in concentrations of nitrates within the drinking water supply. So I'm sure you're very familiar with these issues as well. So in addition to looking at the quality and the character of the resources within the watershed, we perform what we refer to as a pollutant source assessment. So we look at where are these hot spots in terms of where is nitrogen being produced, where is phosphorus being generated, and where is bacteria being generated throughout the watershed. So where are the hot spots in terms of where these pollutant sources are coming from? So we gather all this information together as a way of identifying hotspots of where should we be looking at future improvements, where should we be targeting these conservation practices. So I'll go through very briefly. We summarize, we work on a watershed scale, but when we get to implementation, it's important to do it at a very smaller scale. So we look at these Huck 12 subwatersheds. So in the case of this area, let's, for example, this Hammers Creek, Beaver Creek watershed or subwatershed to the west. So we summarize the information. So what are the impairments? What are the social vulnerabilities? What are the drinking water issues? What are the bacteria issues? We summarize all that information at that Huck 12 scale. So this is kind of the summary of what our watershed assessment looked at. I'll pull through there. So back to the planning process. So I mentioned we begin with this issues identification process where we go out to the community, we go out, identify the stakeholders, we have open houses. We had open houses in Cedar Falls, Waterloo. We had meetings with farmers. You can see in this picture we have very intimate conversation with farmers about their subwatersheds and what's going on their water, in their water resources, really identifying what are the problems throughout the watershed. From that, we have a workshop with the leadership of the WMA to establish goals for the future. So what do we want to see? Do we want to see reductions in nitrate? Do we want to be able to swim in our waters? Do we want to be able to drink them safely? Let's set some goals for that future, for water quality, flooding, and these other issues that you can see. From that, we go back out and had another series of stakeholder meetings, open houses, conversations with the community to get their take on those goals and prioritize those goals and really talk about fine-tuning the goals and objectives that the WMA board developed. Finally, we pull that all together, identify all the issues of concern, all the priority goals, all the priority issues, and came up with a targeting exercise that we led the watershed board through of, if we stack all of those important resources, important issues, where are the specific areas within the watershed that we should be targeting first? And so you can see in this map of the entire Middle Cedar, many of those high priority targeted subwatersheds are in the Cedar Falls, Waterloo metro area, with a few more then scattered throughout the watershed. So those are areas that the Watershed Management Authority should focus on first. We also led the WMA through an exercise of how do you see getting your work done? What kind of mechanisms for implementation do you see being the most effective and the most appropriate for the WMA? And they identified cost share and kind of watershed coordination, education, and outreach as being those most critical tools. So moving on into conservation practices and the implementation phase of what our recommendations are. Larry alluded to a lot of these practices, but we think in terms of conservation in agricultural areas as a conservation pyramid, where the base of that pyramid are those practices that build soil health. Then we move on to infield practices, edge of field practices, and then riparian management, and those would be the stream buffers and those types of things that you hear talk about a lot. So again, moving back down to that subwatershed scale, I'll run through an example again of that Hammers Creek, Beaver Creek subwatershed to your west. And see, we've developed a specific, and I don't know if that's very easy to see, but we develop a specific conservation scenario for that subwatershed based on the specific characteristics of that subwatershed, and come up with a kind of an estimate of what it would take to meet the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy in terms of putting these conservation practices in the ground. So you can see we've got agricultural BMPs, and in the case of subwatersheds that hit municipal areas, we've got urban BMPs as well. So you can see kind of that 20-year annual cost in the order of $1 million per Huck 12, or for this specific Huck 12 to meet that Iowa nutrient reduction strategy. That's made up of all of those conservation practices that Larry talked about, as well as conservation practices like cover crops, extended rotations, and those types of practices. I'm going to skip through the Elk Run example. So on the flip side of this, so that's our investment in water quality, but then we also get a benefit in terms of flood reduction. And so we've done an assessment and evaluation of what would be that benefit in terms of flood reduction that we can expect to see if these conservation practices are in place. And so in the case of the Hammers Creek, Beaver Creek subwatershed, our evaluation looks at a specific flood event that occurred, and in this case, it's in June of 2013. So a fairly significant flood that occurred in 2013, and our evaluation shows that, our modeling shows that if these conservation practices had been in place, it would have been on the order of $2.8 million of savings in terms of flood reduction losses. As a result of a 0.4 foot reduction in that flood event. We can make an annual estimate in terms of the return interval on these flood events and calculate that that's on the order of almost $1 million of savings on an annual basis as a result of these conservation practices in terms of flood reduction. So that's the kind of the overview of what will be in the watershed management plan. We're finalizing it right now. It will come back to you in early spring of 2019 for your approval. As the watershed, Iowa watershed approach kind of sunsets, then, you know, the WMA is left to kind of pick up that energy and move into implementation into the future of this plan. So appreciate the membership, the involvement that we've had from David on the WMA board has been wonderful. So I just wanted to come in and give you guys an overview of the watershed.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you.
Any questions from council? Comments? I'll open up to, anyone have any questions, comments? Sure, please go ahead, Norm.
I'm Sherman Lundy, and my hat tonight is twofold. One of them is I'm a Soil and Water District Commissioner for Black Hawk County, and the other one is I represent the Soil and Water District for both the Upper Cedar and the Middle Cedar River watershed, WMAs. And you should realize that even though Beaver Creek is somewhat out of here, you are directly involved in one of these projects that's under the umbrella of the WMA, working with Larry and his staff, and that is the Dry Run Creek project. The city has already benefited from several $1 million over the last decade that have been invested into this project for both water quality and water quantity. So you are directly involved. And I would like for you to focus on that idea because we are making progress. We've worked with David and the folks that were before him, Seychelle and Amy, of course. A lot of the kinds of projects that you see around here, everything from the permeable pavers on to some of these other types of projects, have trapped water, reducing the amount of water that's actually entering into the river, to the Cedar River over here, and also have helped to improve water quality as well. So keep in mind that this is not something that is other than, this is something that all of us, you and us as citizens over here, are automatically a part of and continue to be a part of.
Thank you. Anything further? Thanks to you all, appreciate that.
Thank you.
Moving on to the final item, is there a motion to approve bills and payroll, please?
Moved.
Motion second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppose, nay. Motion carries. This concludes this evening's Committee of the Whole. We will wait to the top of the hour for our regular city council meeting. Thank you.